So I've always been wanting to be where I'm not, ever since I was young. So when I got a chance to duck a school exam and buzz off to the Himalaya, I took the chance to go because I had the yearning for exploring. And once you had a view like this in the Himalaya or the flora, I guess you tend to get a little bit hooked. So that's Himalayan Edelweiss. And I got the chance to really start pushing my personal boundaries of the mental and the physical areas, which is what was the exciting part in those early days. So when I was standing at 19,000 feet on this peak, it was good fun to know where you could expand your comfort level still. So then when I went on my college expedition over 450 kilometers, and it was the last 6 days without much food, we didn't bat an eyelid. Took to rock climbing in and around Delhi, and then went on to Haryana. And we climbed around the Aravalli, where we then produced a book. And of course, through the process, we also were able to save the Aravalli mountain ranges over here, which were being blasted and being quarried by local stone mafia. We then, of course, went on to experience slightly steeper ground. And I think that's where, when you're hanging on with your toes and fingertips or whatever, that's when you realize that the trick is not to rid your stomach of butterflies, but to make them fly in formation. And I think that's sometime where you start to get your body, mind, and soul together, and to anchor yourself in order to know how much you can push your limits. And it's that sort of experiential learning that you go through and you apply back in life, which is certainly a great help. So whilst I was in university, I clocked a few expeditions, looked at Himachal, went to Garhwal, moved on to the Andaman Islands. And in our travels, we decided that wherever we could, we would try and express our responsibility as good travelers. And here we found that the government's attitude to the tribals was very insensitive. They had made this huge cement block of buildings and had asked these tribals to move in, which of course they did, and they promptly moved out because that wasn't their habitat. We put it out in the media and it was taken note of. I went to the Nanda Devi Sanctuary, which is an area which is so pristine and so beautiful, but that time it was a lot of impact that was coming through with expeditions going there. And they were burning the juniper for firewood. The porters were taking the sheep, and there's a lot of overgrazing. So there's a huge learning that this is not the way you want to be going in these areas of pristine nature and making an impact. So that's when I resolved that I have to do something which is a little more respectful of our environment that we operated in. Whilst I was pursuing my master's in Delhi University, I often thought that expeditions used to come in the way of my studies, actually. So I thought I'll take a year off and travel around the world and train myself. So that's doing some Langlauf skiing, some climbing in the Italian Alps, moving on to trekking in the Swiss Alps, and tasted a little bit of hang gliding in the area of Chamonix. Then I moved on to do some rock climbing in North Wales and some ice climbing in Scotland, and finally some canoeing and kayaking experience, moving on to the sort of crossroads of of my life at that point, which is where I took the road, I guess, a little less travel, which is when I set up one of the earlier adventure travel companies, and we wanted to dedicate this to travelers who would really choose to tread lightly. Luckily, I managed to carry on climbing and exploring and helping others achieve their dreams in this area. And this was on Z1. We made the first ascent, and that was actually my first summit after almost 7 or 8 years of climbing in the Himalaya. So as they say, it's always better to be a good mountaineer rather than a dead mountaineer. So I did have caution in my mind. Climbing Kun, which is a 7,000 meter peak, made me go on to Oregon. We rafted down the Rogue River. And then I got onto a cycling expedition from Delhi to Kathmandu for 1,500 kilometers. I'd never cycled in my life before. We also found that nobody had actually crossed the Thar Desert on camelback. So we did that in '86. And then we decided to push the limits of Indian climbing in terms of technical climbing. And we found that we could go to Mount Meru and make a lightweight ascent, which was done without any tents in a record 4 days. And it was over some steep ground. And we managed to make this first Indian ascent. And it's funnily never been ascended after that by any other Indian team. However, having climbed and really enjoyed the Himalaya, we did notice that at that point there was one particular thing missing, and that was mountain rescue, a system. So we applied for an INLACS grant, 2 mountaineers, 1 doctor, and we managed to get a grant to go to the UK to study mountain rescue, to train in it, and to finally look at the European model, which is on a paid system, whereas the UK one is on a voluntary basis. And that's where we came back and applied the system into the Indian Himalaya, gave it across to certain states, talked to the Indian Mountaineering Foundation, and started training the young people so that they could be of use in the Himalaya. Soon I got involved with a polar explorer who invited 22 young people from about 15 countries and 5 of us as instructors to go to the Arctic North Pole. And Prince Philip was our supporter and a patron of this expedition. We used to run something called the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, for some of you who might have done the gold. So I took a gold awardee with me at the age of 17 to the Arctic North Pole to actually study the ozone hole. And we were supported by the American and the Canadian scientists to look at what we could do in terms of the global environment. And it was obviously a very humbling experience to see that here was this pristine Arctic, and it was full of PCBs, the pollutants coming on from the industrial countries and so on. And what could we do as young individuals over there? And the big answer was, or the big learning was, that each one of us can make a difference. So that's when I resolved to make that little earth pledge a reality for myself in my daily life, in my business, and trying to influence whatever area I had of making a difference. So the first thing we did was to actually sign up with the Himalayan Environment Trust. They have an environment pledge which says very simple things which are achievable, but if you multiply them with the number of people who go there, if we all observe this pledge or the environment points, I think we can make a great difference. For example, for 33 years of our existence as a business, we have never allowed a campfire to take place, which is at the very heart of what commonly perceived experiences for a camp out might be. But if you explain to the people what is the impact to the local people who depend on firewood, I think people understand and people respect you. We get our non-biodegradable garbage back. We camp 100 feet away from water. And it's these small actions that actually make a difference. And for us, it wasn't enough to just keep it at our business level. I wanted to extend it to the Indian industry. And that's allowing or getting the support of the Indian industry to sign the Eco Pledge and say that we will all be responsible. So sometime around then, I was asked to look at how we could save our built heritage and our natural heritage areas and be sensitized to the whole aspect of saving our vernacular architecture, especially in the Himalaya and in the other regions, so that development takes place in a more harmonized way. We've now edited 3 books for the Ministry of Tourism, which basically looks at sensitizing the tourism industry, because we feel that the tourism industry does have a role to play if it is harnessed in the proper manner. And this time, ecotourism was starting to take root, which is basically traveling responsibly to natural areas. That's when we thought that if we go to a place like Zanskar in Jammu and Kashmir, which is an absolutely landlocked area in the winter, and we gave employment to the local people, and we could walk in this fantastic sort of river, then we would allow employment. We could stay in the Zanskari homes, and it would be a fascinating trip, which the Zanskaris have been doing for years, but hasn't been commercially sort of looked at. So that's a band of Zanskaris. And of course, you have to operate at about minus 20 Celsius because it's a frozen river and you hope that it's not going to be melting. Unfortunately, sometimes your sense of humor does freeze a little bit as well, because this was an Indo-British initiative, and I remember one of our friends from UK said, after we did this little bit on portion which the ice had melted, he said, Mandip, your feet hurt. And I said, Mike, actually, feet don't bother us in India because we converted to the metric system and things like that. Anyhow, soon enough, I was called to the UN initiative in the Swiss Alps, which was a joint expedition between India and Pakistan to climb for peace. And the idea was to commemorate the Swiss government on the Aletsch Glacier that they had made into a World Heritage Site, and we would come back and reflect it onto the Siachen Glacier, which is what is a zone of conflict, of course. So that was the hope. We addressed the UN. The Swiss president became our ambassador. And of course, we came back and have been campaigning ever since to try and get the Siachen Glacier as a peace park, because the bizarre statistic there is that every day, there is 1,000 kilograms of human waste that goes into the glacier because of the two armies present. It goes into the Shyok and the Nubra rivers that feed India and goes back into Pakistan. So what are we doing? Can we take care of environment? We looked at Nicobar and Andaman Islands, and we did a joint venture with the government, the state government, and we said we'll map the area for you into saying what type of tourism we need to have. How much of the fragile areas do you want to open to tourism, and what is the kind of responsible travel you want to do? So we had a team from 5 different countries, and we gave the paper to the government, also asking them to be sensitive to the communities, to the tribals, and thankfully that's off limits now. And this was a wonderful experience for us. Similarly, in Nagaland, I was there for a conference, and suddenly we got chatting with the headman to discover that the local people in this village called Konoma, which is near the capital city of Kohima, were hunting the Blight's pheasant, which is endangered, were killing the tragopan, which is reasonably endangered, and that was because they wanted meat on the table. So we said, okay, let's do a project and an experiment where we got an NGO involved called Equations and the state government, and we got them to say that if we get you tourism, you can become naturalists and guides, earn 500 rupees a day, buy 6 chickens for your table, and forget your hunting. So you will save the Blight's pheasant for guiding your tourists, and that's the pledge that the entire village took, and today tourism thrives over there. And this was built really on the original idea of Kerala, which was where they converted the poachers into guides in the Periyar, where my daughter and I had actually walked with them and experienced, which is a wonderful initiative of Kerala tourism. Having gone through all this, we now set our sights higher because we also saw Bandit Queen by then. And I said, why don't we apply this in the Chambal area? So we talked to the Madhya Pradesh government, and they'd, regrettably for them, elected me on their ecotourism board. So I said, if you want to prove ecotourism works, let's get to the Chambal, let's talk to the dacoit families and say that we'll get tourism to them. And if they accept that, then perhaps we will be able to offer an alternative source of livelihood. And that will encourage them to be guides and naturalists, and hopefully the area will thrive. So this is a work in progress. We've been back the second time. And actually the Chambal is so wonderfully endowed with biodiversity. It's got a gharial and a crocodile and a black-headed geese or whatever every 6 steps. And if we are able to convert this to a World Heritage Site, I think it will be a proof that tourism helps. So wherever we travel, we try and do a little bit of good. This is Borneo. We planted trees because a lot of the rainforest is actually lost to plantations, palm oil plantations. So that was doing a little bit of good. We went to Tibet, camped at Lake Mansarovar, did the Kailash Kora, came back and wanted to go to the Everest North Base Camp. And to our horror, we found that the Chinese were making a road into the base camp. What should ideally be a World Heritage Site had a road in it, because this was just pre the Olympics, where they wanted to send a torch up to the summit, and they wanted to have all the officials sitting at base camp and looking at it. So we did our little bit in trying to sensitize the people there. On to Mongolia and Madagascar, and this wonderful area of the baobab trees. We had our dhows, we did our sailing, but to our horror discovered that actually here they served us, when we stayed in lodges, endangered species ducks, and they weren't even aware of it. So, of course, we had to make sure that we got it to the authorities and so on. Our recent trip was in Peru this summer, and in the land of Machu Picchu. We studied how they manage their World Heritage Site. I think about 500 people every day, but it's very well managed. And we've started a two-way process between Peru and India. And we also took time to actually stay with the communities, to check with the communities. And this is a nice component to build in your travels, because if the tourism dollar can go and support communities, I think that's a good expression of ecotourism. We ourselves now do responsible volunteering, which is another expression of good tourism to take part. And to drive all this together, we have now formed the Ecotourism Society of India, which basically does a lot of advocacy for responsible travel within the country, and we hold national workshops all over. We write about eco hotels. I also judge internationally on the good practices that are happening for organizations like the World Travel and Tourism Council, which have something called the Tourism for Tomorrow Awards, and it is informally called the Nobel Prize of Tourism. And it really gladdens my heart to see that worldwide there are some fantastic examples of good stuff happening through tourism. These are Frigate Island in Seychelles, for example. It is rehabilitating a bird species which was lost for almost 80 years. And Kelly and Peacock in Kenya are a safari company that are rehabilitating certain land to get back species of animals back in their area. So all this and many other conservation methods that we keep abreast with really makes my heart soar. And of course, I keep testing my mind and body still, despite a white beard, on certain situations like that. But basically, I think it reflects Lynn Cox's statement that when I'm on expedition, I undertake the two journeys. And this, for me, has always been important. And this is what I'd love to transmit. And a lot of it has been talked about earlier, which I think is so true, that it's the inner and the outer always. And as I think they say in life, the question is not what you look at, but what you see. And it is said by Thoreau, and I thoroughly agree. And I have to say at the end, let's travel for good, but also for goodness sake, travel. Thank you.